as a belief. And then we'll be able to bring a meeting to a close. There are no minutes to consider. Suffice to say, honorable members, at the end, we'll look at announcements that look at the special appropriations bill and how we can proceed on that basis. With that in mind, with that agenda, it is brief, it is direct. May I ask if there's a member who's willing to move for the adoption of the agenda this morning? Ciao. Jilindewe nangu.
I move Madonna and I move that.
Aike. Uko ngasekenda uchawe for the adoption of the agenda this morning.
Ndiyasekela tata Sihlalo umama
Enkosi mama kyaleboha mentuli.
Thank you.
The agenda then being duly adopted, honorable members. I did not receive any notification regarding any apologies. So, Mashila, are there any apologies that have subsequently come through?
No, Chair, we don't have any apology at the moment.
It is a good day to not have any apologies, and so we can thus, in that light, proceed. Honorable members and members on the platform, this meeting is convened as periodically we have, as a committee, we get briefings by National Treasury on quarterly expenditure. We look at key entities and where their respective performances as enabled by subsequent pieces of legislation. For example, we'll have a look at ESCOM this morning and its own debt relief appropriation that was set up and some of the reporting as it speaks to that. There are a number of other aspects that we will be considering today and other entities. This meeting was moved effectively because of the public hearings that we are meant to have, and so the dates have had to be impacted relative to where it is. We will look at reports all the way through, and then I'm hoping that soon enough we'll be able to catch up to make sure we are up to date with the latest information. I say that to mean, honorable members, that much of the presentations have been sent and circulated a number of days before Honorable Mwali. They were circulated a number of days before, and therefore it's in the light of that that we have read through the presentations. We'll be able to take it going forward. Honorable Wycliffe, can you mute your device, please, as a brief?
My device is muted, Chair.
I don't know why I also suffered the consequences of being muted myself. But in the light of that, to the team at National Treasury, what we will do is allow you to proceed with the presentation. You will have, given the number of presentations that are on, you will have half an hour. I will allow respective parties to be able to pose questions when we look at some of the presentations that are on the go, and then we'll take it from there. I don't think it's important that we get through the information rather than a read shop, and so I'm much appreciated in terms of the work that we'll do. So I'm not sure who is leading the team from National Treasury. We typically get an apology from the Deputy Minister of Finance. I haven't received any executive apologies, so I would want to assume that the minister is here. If the minister isn't here, then we'll move our way through. So maybe, Ulrika, you can tell me who the team is on here, and then who will lead the team that is on here.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Today we have the team from Public Finance, as always, around the third quarter expenditure, and we have the team on assets and liabilities, who comes and tells us about state-owned companies. Chair, you had also asked for a specific presentation around disasters and the funding of disasters.
Correct,
I am told that my colleagues, there was some confusion with my colleagues, so we will present how it works on the contingency reserve today, and they'd asked if it's okay to make a written submission to the committee on the details around the expenditure and the legal framework that underpins the work and the responsibilities of national transferring officers that I'll take you through. So we will do, and as you know, Chair, it's an extensive presentation. You saw that the slides are over 100 from our side, and quite extensive from the ALM side. So I'll take my cue from you on how we go through that presentation and the details that we then have in there. Thank you.
So whilst I've had a look at that, and what I'm very keen to do is make sure that by at least 9 o'clock, the members can begin deliberations. Part of the work that we're doing is because you would have read in the recommendation on the Division of Revenue Bill that was recently adopted, is that what we certainly can't do is mitigate against disaster on the back of contingency funding. It's become common cause that climate change is a function of our society. And so we need to think prospectively about how we can legislatively empower National Treasury to be able to forecast, even though you can't forecast natural disasters, but to forecast the budgeting as it pertains to that, because it's got implications on local government, provincial government, and national government. So you'll see there is a recommendation coming through on the Division of Revenue Bill, and that's part of our engagement and why prospectively we want to look at this matter, so that we're not always finding ourselves with the Contingency Reserve Fund having to play catch up in the face of disaster. That is the philosophical thinking. So that's the question that we want to get answered. So when you go through the slides, we'll go through that. But let me allow you to go through the presentations, and then as we work things out, we'll be able to gauge our way through and make sure that members are able to participate at the right time. But it is now 12 minutes past 8. So I will be gracious enough to allow you to keep going till 9 o'clock, and then we'll assess them.
Ulrika, you're mute.
Mute. Okay, there. I'm hoping that I'm unmuted now. So, Chair, as I had said, the presentation is extensive, and I'm hoping that I don't have to go through all the slides, and I would like to give my colleagues in ALM sufficient time to go through all of this. And as always, Chair, we are presenting a summary of the departmental expenditure, where we look at those with the highest and the lowest projected underspending in the third quarter, and we do this by department and by economic classification, and I lay out what that is. The presentation also includes the spending summary for selected public entities, and there's a few slides around unauthorized, irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure, which is around financial governance. And then I explain some parts of what happens within the disaster system, but my colleagues from IGR, who's better placed around what's happening from a spending and performance point of view, as I had explained earlier, is hoping to make a written submission on this. Then just on aggregate, where we're at, we have third quarter expenditure against projections, which is about just over 20 billion rand, or under 20 billion rand, lower than projected expenditure. Most of this is related to slower than projected transfers, if we look at that by economic classification, and we will explain why that happens in subsequent slides. The departments with the highest spending against projections, or where spending against projections is higher than what was planned, is in social development, in the Department of Defense, Police, Agriculture, and Water and Sanitation, and the details are provided for in the subsequent slides. So for in social development, higher than projected expenditure because we had higher than projected increased payments on the social relief of distress. In defense, faster than projected spending on compensation of employees as always. And in goods and services, there's also a faster than projected expenditure on transfers driven by the appointment of the Reserve Force Council chairperson. In police, higher than projected expenditure in relation to goods and services for payments to public works for leases and property payments. On capital assets, because of some of the carry-through invoices that came from the previous quarter around the procurement of transport equipment, and that's mostly vehicles, and on transfers and subsidies around leave gratuities for employees who are leaving the system. In agriculture, Chair, and you'll notice, I mean, agriculture's turning around from where we were in the first quarter, where they were one of those with the lowest projected, lower than, or the departments who had spent the lowest relative to the projections in the first and the second quarter. This has turned around partly because of some transfers that was made to the ARC and some work that they were doing around the payment of invoices related to the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program. In water and sanitation, higher than expected transfers on the conditional grants to municipalities and water boards, and in payments for capital assets, which is quite encouraging given that this department always has a history of underspending on its capital budget, and this relates to the indirect grants that sits on the department's capital budgets for the regional bulk infrastructure and water services infrastructure grants. The departments that have recorded the lowest and lower than projected expenditure is cooperative governance, higher education, trade and industry, transport and land reform. And the details around all of this in the Department of Cooperative Governance relates to the withholding of the municipal infrastructure grant and the local government equitable share as part of various interventions that we have in relation to how municipal financing works, and them paying in relation to them paying water boards, for example, for rollovers that had not been approved, or in the case of MIG, when conditions have not been met in relation to the Division of Revenue Act. In higher education, it is specifically related to slower than projected transfers that was made to the University Capacity Development Grant. And this is just because reports were not received timeously from the relevant institutions. Chair, I think it's important for us to understand that the PFMA, specifically in the Treasury regulations, places specific responsibilities on transferring officers or of national departments before they transfer money to other institutions. Some of those governance requirements around all of that may mean that they withhold the money. And in circumstances like the one we have in higher education, when proper reporting isn't being done, the department may withhold the money until all of that is done. And I mean, that is consistent with some of the kind of improvements we would like to see in the governance around how payments are made to other institutions. In relation to trade and industry, similarly, some of the incentives, so the transfers for a couple of the incentives that they have within the system, and because of delays in the finalizing of the agreements for some of the SEZs. In transport, slower than projected expenditure on transfers and subsidies due to slower than projected transfers made to SANRAL, the Road Traffic Infringement Agency, and the Road Traffic Infringement Agency. The one on the Road Traffic Infringement Agency relates specifically to the RTO implementation, which keeps being postponed, and as a result, the funds are not flowing. On rural development, this relates to the land reform program, where we're seeing slower than projected expenditure in relation to sellers not accepting land purchase offers from the department. There are some other operational expenditures in relation to compensation of employees. The rural development is one of those departments. Land reform and rural development, rather, is one of those departments that we had that was part of the reorganization of government in 2024-25, and as a result of that, the split between this department and the Department of Agriculture meant that there's some organizational issues that needs still to be finalized. That they meant that there was some underspending that we saw in some of the operating issues, specifically around compensation of employees. From an economic classification point of view, we have the perennial problem in defense, where there's higher than projected expenditure on compensation of employees. This is because the defense force has more people than what they have in the budget for, and as a result, we are projecting a read this properly, a variance of about 2.2 billion rand in the third quarter, and that's cumulative. In rural development and land reform, on personnel, and this is partly related to, as I'd explained earlier, the reorganization of government and the shifts between the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development. On police, personnel is due to vacant posts that haven't been filled and the implementation or the non-implementation of the grade progression. So we're seeing slower than projected expenditure in police. We're also seeing slower than projected expenditure on personnel in the Department of Employment and Labour. And this is partly a systems problem, more than it is where they have not filled vacant posts. And so there's a misalignment that has popped up around an upgrade within the system. That means there's some discrepancies. This will be corrected for the following quarter's report. Then on goods and services, defense also higher than expected expenditure related to the deployment of Defence Force members through Operation Impilo. Goods and services in police is also higher than projected because of as I'd explained earlier on, property payments and lease payments that was made to the Department of Public Works. That has been long outstanding. In justice and constitutional development, this is for ICT upgrades where we're seeing higher than projected expenditure. In relation to lower than projected expenditures, forestry, fisheries and environment is related to the public employment program, where there has been some delays in the starting of projects. In home affairs, mostly related to the digitization program, where we're seeing lower than expected expenditure on goods and services. In human settlements, it's a bunch of things from travel all the way through to some of the advertising and marketing stuff marketing campaigns that they are running, and some issues around late submission of invoices from the travel agent around all of that. In water and sanitation, we have higher than projected, as I'd explained when we showed the department's expenditure in relation to transfers on conditional grants and transfers to water boards, in social development as explained in the SRD, and as explained in defense around the Reserve Force Council. As explained again also on cooperative governance around the withholding of the equitable share and MIG. In higher education, I've also explained this before around the university capacity grant. In transport, I'd explained this around because this also popped up in one of the departments with the highest underspending or projected underspending in relation to transfers to SANRAL and the Road Traffic Infringement Agency for ARTO. Again, reinforcing around payments for capital assets, where we're seeing higher than projected spending in water and sanitation, on the indirect conditional grants, in police around, as I'd explained, the acquisition of transport equipment. On payments for capital assets, we see higher than projected expenditure in forestry, fisheries and the environment around ICT. And this is becoming a growing pressure, Chair, around, and I think for a lot of departments on how they procure ICT equipment and the pressures it then places on the budget in the licenses and the utilization of those licenses. In relation to lower than projected expenditure, basic education comes out as one of the top 3 departments, mostly because of the school infrastructure backlogs grant, where projects are being phased down and they are being currently closed out. This grant is being phased into the education infrastructure grant. So this is the last year that we see this grant in the budget. So as they go into a close out phase of this program, we should see this being absorbed into the provincial expenditures on the conditional grant. In DCOC, so like for the first time in this year, this budget, we have an indirect component in the municipal infrastructure grant, where the national department, through its implementing agents, implements on behalf of municipalities, and there's been some delays in the seeding of contracts and getting those projects off the ground and resolving the institutional arrangements that has resulted in higher than projected underspending on payments for capital assets. Similarly, in human settlements, so let me explain this because I'll get back to it in a little bit later. So in the human settlement sector, we have emergency housing as an indirect, it's not an indirect grant, but it sits on the capital budget of the National Department, where they implement emergency housing projects on behalf of provinces and municipalities. And as a result, this then sits on their budget. So they respond to that, as opposed to where money gets transferred through some of the disaster grants to respond to disasters. And we're seeing lower than projected expenditure in relation to the provinces that has, or the response to some of the disasters that have recently happened in Mpumalanga and Limpopo. So that was the beginning of the year. Then, Chair, on the direct charges on the National Revenue Fund, we just give a summary of what's happening in relation to spending versus actual spending versus planned spending as a percentage of the available budget. And we explain what that looks like. Chair, I'm not going to go through the second quarter for public entities because I want to give my colleagues time to present on them. And so what I'm going to do, Chair, is I'm going to go straight to explaining this issue about disasters and how disasters fit within the budgeting framework. And I'm sorry, it's the last slide. So, Chair, let me just explain how this happens, because the funding for disasters from the contingency reserve forms part of the adjustments budget, and funding for disasters are considered as unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure in terms of Section 30 of the PFMA. And it happens in the normal parts of the adjustments budget process, where the contingency reserve forms part of the fiscal framework that we table with the main budget. That at the time of the adjustments budget gets filtered through in the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill and the Adjusted Appropriation Bill that gets tabled. In the context of disaster recovery, and there's different components around disasters. So we have the first phase around disasters is before the event actually happens, and that is in the kind of mitigation and risk reduction phase, which is the preparation phase for a disaster. Once the event happens, we have immediate response grants in the system, but what we have in the contingency reserve deals with beyond the immediate response grants, it deals with the recovery and the rehabilitation. We treat it differently for provinces than we do for municipalities, whereas for provinces, rehabilitation funds flows through the sector grants. There's a component in the education infrastructure grant in the recent adjustments budget and in the provincial roads maintenance grant. So that's what we do for provinces. For municipalities, it flows through the disaster recovery grant that is managed by the Department of Cooperative Governance. As I had explained around the higher than projected underspending in payments for capital assets in human settlements, we treat emergency housing slightly differently. I mean, and this is an historical issue around whether you could take grants that are Schedule 7 grants and make them indirect grants. And because we're not able to do that, the money sits for our response to emergency housing and human settlements sits in the capital and the operational budget of the department, which is why it showed up as spending on the capital budget of the department. The rules around all of this, Chair, is all governed by, in the case of the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, by the duties of the transferring officer set out for Schedule 4 grants, which is the Education Infrastructure Grant and the Provincial Roads Maintenance Grant, and the Schedule 5 grant, which is the Municipal Disaster Recovery Grant, that's set out in the Division of Revenue Act, which sets out the responsibilities around planning. It sets out the responsibilities around how transferring officers and what circumstances the transferring officers should transfer these funds, and it sets out the reporting requirements for these transferring officers. So while it may look like it's just business as usual around what we're doing in disasters, the part of the management system is about especially with provinces, is how do you integrate this within those conditional grants so that it becomes part of the normal planning processes? So it's almost about how do you start mainstreaming some of this into those conditional grants. Chair, I'm going to stop there and I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ravesh Rajlal, to take you through the state-owned companies.
Thank you, Ulrika. Good morning, Honorable Chair. Good morning, Honorable Members. My name is Ravesh Rajlal from the Assets and Ability Management Division. I'm going to basically take you through the quarter 3 results for our state-owned companies. Let me just try and get the presentation up. Chair, I'm just checking if you can see the presentation.
I can see you. I haven't seen the presentation.
Okay, let me try again and resend. Share again. There you go. So, Chair, basically what I'm going to do is just take you through the 4 major state-owned companies in terms of their performance for quarter 3. I think we're going to start with Eskom. So basically, just trying to see. There we go. Apologies for that. Some technical issues. So basically here, in terms of Eskom, what we basically outlining is just the performance for quarter 3. I think I'm not going to go to all the slides, but just to focus on some of the salient points. I think the first point that we wanted to mention is just around their performance, that their profitability continues to be negatively impacted by the municipal arrears, and you can see that their municipal debt has increased by 12.3 billion. Let me just go back again to over 100 billion. It was at this point in December 94.8 billion. So I think that's a cause for concern. Obviously, their profit at the same time has improved, and you can see that they've registered a net profit of 27.6 billion, which far exceeded the budget of 16.4 billion. Then we move on to sort of focus on the next slides here, which basically this is just about the financial ratios, which I won't go into detail about, but just on the operational performance here, I think in terms of the availability factor as well, you've seen that that has increased to 64% from 60% in March 2025. Obviously, still slightly below their targets. Coal-fired power stations has also recorded an energy utilization factor of 80.3% for the period, which is much higher than their long-term expected average of 75%. So operationally, Eskom has shown signs of improvement. Also, in terms of the OCGTs, they've generated 1,050 gigawatts during the period, which is more than double the 319 recorded in the same period of 2024-25. So I'm going to go to this slide. It also talks about the improvement. This slide, I just want to focus the Honourable Chair and members just around the Eskom Debt Relief Act, where we are in terms of the support in terms of Eskom. And as you know, we basically initially the support package was 254 billion, which 78 billion was allocated in 23-24, 66 billion in 24-25, and then 40 in 25-26. And these advances, just to remind the honourable members, is that they're strictly earmarked for capital and interest payments. And we are also in the initial act, we provided for 70 billion rand as a debt takeover. The reason why I've highlighted this part is that things have changed since we submitted this presentation. So to date, when we mentioned at the point it was submitted in the middle of March, government had already at that point advanced and converted 180 billion into equity. which is slightly below planned, the planned amount due to Eskom's failure to dispose of the Eskom finance company, as we mentioned before. This has subsequently changed to 220 billion that has now been advanced. In fact, 80 billion was advanced in the last few days to Eskom. So that amount of 140 billion is changed to 220 billion. Obviously, the 80 billion is not yet converted to equity. We still have to go through the process of ensuring that they meet the conditions, the strategic conditions, in order for that 80 billion to be basically converted. So hence, I've just wanted to flag that that's a significant change that we've had since the presentation was submitted. So here, basically, this slide just reminds the honourable members in terms of how we've basically restructured the debt relief package. The package has now been amended to 230 billion in total, representing savings, as I mentioned in the previous slide, of 24 billion compared to the original allocation. And the final tranches will basically comprise of 80 billion, which has now been dispersed at the end of 25-26. And there's a further 10 billion to be dispersed in 28-29. And I think just to remind the honourable members, as well, is that these loans, which are converted to equity, are also interest bearing as well. I've also mentioned this in terms of the interest bearing. I think just to recap as well, in terms of the interest that's paid to date, there's 1.2 billion in interest that has been paid to National Treasury in terms of the interest bearing loans. I think we also want to flag that despite the improvements in the Eskom's financial and operational position, significant risk remains, particularly the growth, as I've mentioned before, of municipal area debt. This continues to threaten the financial sustainability more around when we're doing the unbundling of distribution. So I think that's something that the Treasury is working together with Eskom, SALGA, and COCTA as well. Just in terms of the Debt Relief Act conditions, where we've set targets, so basically they've met those targets, and hence the conversion of the debt of the loan into equity. So this just reminds the honourable members as well in terms of the conditions, in terms of the Debt Relief Act. So I'm not going to go through all of these 9 conditions. There are 9 of them, but I think that gives you just a flavour in terms of the 9 conditions that Eskom has to meet before we convert that loan into equity. So the next phase of converting of the loan is the 80 billion that will hopefully be converted into equity in the new financial year, once we've basically evaluated the conditions and we meet on a quarterly basis, where we then go through the conditions to ensure that Eskom has met these 9 conditions to be converted, which allows the loan of 80 billion to be converted into equity. And obviously it applies to the 10 billion as well in 28-29. The Treasury is at the moment also busy looking at reviewing these conditions, the strategic conditions, and it's also operational conditions, because the conditions do expire at the end of this financial year, and seeing that we've extended the debt relief package to 28-29, we also need to ensure that the conditions reflect or are extended to accommodate it being now extended to the debt relief package being extended to 28-29. I think just moving on to SAA, I don't want to go into this background detail. I think it's well known. I think just to flag on this particular slide is just the challenges that SAA is facing, in repatriating funds from Zimbabwe. It's still R1 billion. And it's a slow pay. It's quite slow from their side. So obviously, this would help them quite significantly should they recover these funds in terms of their cash flow situation. That's just the one on the background. Just in terms of performance, at the end of quarter three, they reported a loss of 341 million. which is a negative variance of 443 billion compared to budget. And it was largely driven by SAA's reported loss. So this is the group, SAA group. And they've generated 8.7 billion in revenue against a budget of 11 billion. Just here on financial performance, just drilling down into the loss, it was largely, as you would have seen from the previous slide, by the revenue coming 20% below budget, and largely as a result of not operating all its planned routes and frequencies, low average fares, and your low average load factors as well. Operating expenses amounted to 8.9 billion, which was 15% below budget of 10.5 billion. Just on financial performance here, again, what's positive to reflect on is there a positive achievement in terms of operating costs, 15%, largely due to fuel and electricity, your aircraft maintenance, aircraft lease costs, and also other operating costs. So that's one positive that we can also see from an SAA financial performance for the quarter. Then moving on to the next major entity that we're dealing with from a network industry perspective is Transnet. Here again, I'm not going to go into too much of detail in terms of the background. I think we've seen some of these slides before. But again, we just want here on the guarantees, which we report to this committee on in terms of compliance to conditions and so forth. It's important to also highlight to the committee and the honourable members that Transnet has been provided with 196 billion in government guarantees. I think they've drawn down close to 80 billion of those guarantees. And just in terms of, obviously, this is the process in terms of how we concluded the guarantee framework agreement, whose inputs are included, and obviously just the amendments that basically were done to the GFA to incorporate the additional guarantees that were issued subsequent to the first guarantee of 47 billion that was issued back in 23, I think 24. So I suppose what's important to also highlight here on this on last point is that just in terms of conditions, Transnet has met 10 of the 25 conditions. Just moving on to the next slide to highlight to you that they've met 10 with one condition being at risk. So the one condition being at risk, basically, this is quite a busy slide, but it's a good slide just to highlight the conditions, which conditions are met. There's 10 conditions that are completed, that are met, 14 that are in progress, and that are in line or that are in progress to be met. I think the one condition that we flag here is just around disposal of non-core property, which they need to dispose, a value at 560 million rand, in fact, by the end of business today, which is the end of the financial year. So this is quite a good overview in terms of just highlighting to you, the conditions that basically the 25 conditions that are included in the government framework agreement and compliance there too. Here, like we do with most of our entities, we have our monitoring committees and
sorry, I apologize. Just that previous slide. I think if you can spend a little bit more time on some of the conditionality as it speaks to this issue, because to some extent I'm asking myself the question, why does Eskom achieve one set of results and Transnet, we can't restructure the deal going forward? So maybe I looked at some of you just scanned through them quick, and I know you mentioned one about the selling of that, but maybe just a little bit more time on that issue. And I don't want to disrupt you because it does speak to the nub of some of the issues that I Transnet. Would you mind?
Sure, not a problem, Chair. Thanks for that, and thanks for just honing back on this slide, which is quite an important slide. I think where we have the difference between Eskom and Transnet, I think it's important just to flag that Eskom, we have strategic conditions, the 9 conditions that we talked about, that basically are important and quite significant from an Eskom perspective to meet those conditions, because if they don't meet those conditions, we monitor on a quarterly basis, then it doesn't allow for that loan to be converted into equity. And I think that's important from a Eskom perspective, that the loan gets converted to equity so that they are solvent and liquid from, and also they're a going concern, because you don't want to have a situation where we are then loading them with more debt. And also, Chair, which, what we don't share with you is the quite detailed operational conditions which they would have to meet as well, which is not required for them from a strategic perspective to meet those conditions, but from a conversion of an equity, loan to equity, those 9 conditions that I honed on just briefly, not honed on, but briefly went through, are quite important for them to meet. However, here with Transnet, it's slightly different, where we haven't provided any direct equity support or debt relief to Transnet, and hence these are just the guarantee framework conditions. Obviously, there are the BFI support that's been provided, and that's been mentioned in our Annexure D, I think it is, which basically highlights the I think it's 11 to 14 billion that's been that will be that Transnet will get over a period of time in terms of the various projects there. So that's different. Obviously, there's conditions there. However, with these conditions, what we track on a monthly basis is these are the conditions that are ensconced in the guarantee framework agreement, which is concluded between Transnet, Treasury, and DOT. So it's important and incumbent on Transnet to ensure that they meet these conditions on a monthly basis, and we track them, because should we have a situation where we are not, as a committee, happy with or are satisfied that they're meeting these conditions, then it becomes difficult from a Transnet perspective to basically draw down on further guarantees against the 196 billion. So I did mention briefly that they've drawn down 80 billion. So when they do need to draw down further funding or further against the guarantees, then they would we need to ensure that they've met these conditions. Obviously, there have been some amendments to the conditions. So just briefly, in terms of some of the issues around, for example, like you've got on the left hand side here, the infrastructure manager, matters, for example, TRIM. That's the Transport Rail Infrastructure Manager. That has to be a wholly owned subsidiary by 30th of September. So there's been a few slippages in the past, but obviously we've amended the condition to ensure that we don't negatively impact the progress or the process that we need to ensure that TRIM is wholly owned and established by 30th September. So the same for the issues with TNPA. I think just to establish TNPA as well, that's also been a challenge. But we need to make sure that we give Transnet the sufficient time to ensure that it is established, but also we hold them to account to make sure that we don't let these timeframes slip too further down the line. So I think, as you can see here, Honourable Chair, PSP transactions, we can say that TNP has been established as a wholly owned subsidiary, and that obviously there were some few slippages at the onset. Now, on disposal of non-core properties here, Transnet, basically, when we were creating or developing the conditions for the GFA, they at the onset committed that they can dispose of non-core properties of 560 million rand by the 31st of March, and that's where we are holding them to account to say we didn't thumbs up this number. You've committed this number in terms of disposal of non-core properties, and therefore for us to hold you account, we're going to monitor this and make sure that you achieve this disposal of 560 million. So at the moment, as you can see, it's red. So obviously we need to get feedback in the quarter 4 to see where they are in terms of progress against that. And it applies to all these conditions, Honourable Chair. With regards to how we've actually structured this and how Transnet basically reports this, we basically have a quite detailed, discussion with them around what's doable, what's not, and then we sign this as a framework agreement, as I mentioned, and we hold each other to account that you meet these conditions. And where we're seeing a great progress or good progress, like the 14 that we've mentioned, then obviously, that's going on track. But obviously, they've already completed 10, and obviously there are those mentioned in green. So hopefully, Chair, that gives you a kind of a brief overview in terms of how we basically distinguish between the ESCOM Debt Relief Act conditions and the strategic conditions there, which is for the debt relief loan converted to equity, vis-a-vis the Transnet, guarantees, where basically we, as well agree with these conditions with Transnet and Department of Transport, but we also monitor to ensure that before we release or we sign off any guarantee agreements or the minister concurs to any guarantee agreements, we make sure that these conditions are also met. So it's not a blanket approval. We hold them to account as well in terms of ensuring that these conditions are met. And the 80 billion odd that's been drawn down, we are comfortable that at that point that they've met sufficiently most of these conditions, Chair. Okay. Honorable Chair, I'm just moving on then to just the financial and operational performance. This basically shows the Honorable Chair and members that there's been some progress in terms of the performance in terms of rail volumes, slight increases compared to the previous year, but obviously slightly shy of the current year's budget targets. In terms of volumes across the business, traded lower than budget. Rail volumes, as you can see, reached 123.67 billion tons, still slightly below 8.1% below budget. And it's the same throughout the business as well in terms of just volumes. Obviously, we're waiting for the Q4 results to see exactly how that actually has improved or not in terms of budget for the year. But generally speaking, slightly from a financial performance point of view, you can see some of the rail volumes increasing, but just in terms of the other areas of the business, it's slightly below budget, but slightly higher than the previous year's actuals. Here, basically in terms of revenue, again, below budget, and it's largely driven by lower budget. It's largely driven to operational inefficiencies, and this has been quite publicly mentioned as well from a transport perspective. Derailments, theft, vandalism, which obviously further worsen their commodity pricing and volumes that were basically transported. The EBITDA margins was to 23.6 billion, exceeding the budget slightly by 23.4 billion. So I think here we just want to flag that it's quite close to budget, but obviously we just need to monitor this in terms of just ensuring that from a revenue perspective that they do transport the revenues or the volumes that we need Transnet to transport. But again, here the EBITDA is mostly driven through your savings in your operating costs. So I think that is a positive from the EBITDA perspective in terms of operating costs, but revenue again, that's where we need to drive the volumes much higher than what we're seeing at the moment. Here, again, just continuing on the financial performance with Transnet, we can see that their loss for the period was 3.8 billion, significantly worse than the budgeted loss of 674 million. And again, here, just to re-emphasize the point that it's largely driven by your operational volume targets not being met, even though they've improved from an operating cost perspective. But if you're not hitting your volumes, then you are basically you're going to suffer the consequences in terms of your net loss position. Here, just the last point on financial performance, just in terms of its capital expenditure, they've They are spending, but slightly again below their budgeted out amount of 18.96 billion for quarter three. Last but not least, we also want to just bring you up to speed in terms of where we are with regards to Denel. I think here we, as we've mentioned before, Honourable Chen and honourable members, that Denel is implementing its turnaround plan, and they are busy at this current moment in terms of the stabilization phase of the plan. So they've appointed the permanent executive team. They are ramping up the aeronautics subsidiary and also securing new contracts to improve the revenue outlook. But it's not progressing as swiftly as we'd want to see it. And just to highlight here again is this in terms of the 3.378 billion fiscal support that's been provided to Denel in 2022, a ring-fenced amount of 156 million remains, and this is largely going to be used for repairs and maintenance, working capital and capital projects. From a guarantee perspective, the Minister of Finance has concurred to a 660 million government guarantee, and this is for the Oman G6 contract. And obviously, there's conditions that are being monitored, and obviously, the next iteration, honourable chair members will just also flag these conditions as well in terms of them meeting where we are in terms of them meeting that those specific conditions for this guarantee. That's the only guarantee that they have from a Denel perspective. Financial performance, revenue to date is at 970 million against a budget of 1.2 billion. So there's a lot of work, in terms of execution of the pipeline. As I mentioned before, they're still, operating at an operating loss of 239 million, slightly higher than your budgeted loss, but it's not things significant to really write home about. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done from a revenue perspective, and obviously executing on some of their products or key projects as well. So that's a key issue from a Denel perspective, to ensure that they execute and also deliver on their revenue pipeline as well. Denel's operating loss, just the slide, just continuing here. See, we've got a couple of minutes left, 3 minutes left. Just in terms of the operating loss of 235 million improved when you look at the contribution from associated companies. So they reported a profit after tax of 234 million, and this is largely driven by the munitions business, which delivered profitability of 1.6 billion. So that's their kind of key business or associate that's keeping them afloat. And then just in terms of assets, it's got assets of 7.8 billion against liabilities of 5.8 billion. So they are, a going concern, or they are solvent. But I think here the challenge is around current assets of 3.9 billion, which remains below current liability of 4.9. So there is a liquidity risk, and we just need to monitor that in terms of them not being able to meet their short-term obligations as they become due. So again, just to flag the issue here around Denel's pipeline. They've got a pipeline, and they've always had a good pipeline in terms of what it currently stands at is about 36.5 billion. But again, here they just need to ensure that they execute on the pipeline, and to make sure that they have these private sector partners coming in to also assist them with delivering and executing on the pipeline as well. Just the last point here is just to flag that execution on their turnaround plan is quite a key priority, and just ensuring that they deliver on their pipeline, as I've mentioned a few times, to ensure that happens, and then we can basically see a more financially sustainable Denel. Chair, I think that was the last slide, so let me stop there and hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that in terms of the time commitment. I wanted to ask, Ulrike, whether or not there were particular slides that you'd skipped over that looked at this the second component of some of the SOEs, if I'm not mistaken, that you skipped over. I don't know if you want to spend 10 minutes just talking through those, and then I'll open up for deliberations. I know you skipped over them to allow the colleagues time, and it may feel like we're going backwards and forwards, but I thought there were some components that that maybe if you wanted to highlight so that they don't have to come up. Well, when I say when they do come up within questions, we've at least covered that. Would that be okay with you?
Yes, Chair. Let me go. I think there's a couple of public entities that are quite important to understand, and I'm pretty sure the committee would appreciate
Yes.
some insights, particularly around what's happening on the SARS budget. So let me just share this again.
My apologies for having to ask you to do that, but I just think it might be crucial just to help us in this intervention.
I'm happy to do this, Chair. So I'm going to be quite discriminate about this, Chair. Sorry, I don't know why it's taking me back there. But let me maybe spend some time on the big ones. So what's happening around the compensation fund, as this slide really just shows that higher than projected revenue for the second quarter, and lower than projected expenditure, which means the surplus is higher than projected is higher than we had projected. Part of this just relates to something that happens within how they collect revenue. And the forecast around all of that. The second component in what's happening around expenditure is that they paid less claims than what was projected. And I think this is quite important in relation to just thinking about the efficiency in how we manage these things, because there does seem to be some problems around the verification systems within the compensation fund. Then I'm going to skip over legal aid. I'm going to skip over the National Empowerment Fund. I'm going to touch on the National Health Laboratory Service, because this is part of some of the issues here relates to how the intergovernmental relations and components associated with this. So what we have here is marginally lower than projected expenditure, or revenue rather, lower than projected revenue. The NHLS provides services to provinces, so provinces are not paying them in the way that they were hoping to be paid, and we're seeing expenditure more or less in line with their forecasts. What we don't show on here, Chair, because we're just showing the cash flow statement, so this is just kind of what's happening from a more operational point of view, is what's happening on the balance sheet of some of these institutions, and we might have to come and talk to you about how do we present some of these issues to you. So for the NHLSO, when you do see that provinces are not paying them, what you see on their balance sheet are these kind of receivables increasing in the same way that we have these mismatches in the intergovernmental payment system. I'm going to skip over the NRF. Let's talk about what's happening in the National Skills Fund. So even though this is kind of more or less in line with budget, so expenditure is slightly lower than what we had planned, and this is really around payments, so about 1.1 billion rand less, 1.2 billion rand less than projected. And the reason why we have lower than projected expenditure in the National Skills Fund relates to some administrative problems that they have on transfers and subsidies specifically, and therefore payments don't get made to institutions in the way that they had anticipated, because there's something in the reporting and the verification system that's not happening in the way that they had expected. Then the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Revenue is in line with projections. So this is the department is transferring money mostly in line with projections. There's some marginal differences around all of that. From an expenditure point of view, expenditure is higher than projected, and that is because there are the higher number of students than what they have anticipated to make payments to in the second quarter. This is mostly related to more students being funded than what we then have within the allocated budget. We've had this, we've discussed this before, where there's not an immediate problem from a budgeting point of view around all of this. There's a problem going forward, but for this financial year, this will be offset against surpluses that the National Student Financial Aid Scheme has. So we shouldn't have a problem for this financial year, and we show that also in what we reflected in the budget review. On PRASA, so PRASA's had a couple of challenges in relation to the mismatches in its capital and its operating budget. And as it was extending its capital expansion program and bringing new lines on board, passengers weren't coming as fast as, and they're still not coming on stream as fast as projected, which is why you see on the revenue side that the sales from fares is about 400 million. And as a result of that, even though the transfers are keeping up with this, it does create these operating deficits, which we are trying to resolve through the adjustments budget and what we had been presented in the budget in February this year. From an expenditure point of view, so expenditure on CapEx is slower than projected. We know that in the third quarter, this picks up because they had finalized the procurement around the signaling, which is why we are able to scale that up, whereas by the second quarter, they hadn't done that. And this is specifically in relation to contracts for signaling in the Western Cape, in KZN, and in Gauteng. Let me move on to the Road Accident Fund. So again, in the same way that with NHLS, you don't, some of the challenges that the Road Accident Fund faces, you don't necessarily see from a cash point of view that you see on their balance sheet. But what this presents is that, I mean, revenue is more or less in line with the way we had projected. So the transfers that they get from the fuel levy and payments are slightly behind. So there's a 1.4 billion rand lower than projected spending on payments, claims payments that is made. And as a result of that, it does look like there is a higher than projected surplus at the end of the second quarter in the Road Accident Fund. SANRAL, a couple of things happening in the SANRAL budget. I mean, SANRAL has historically significant underspending and had kind of sat on large cash surpluses, which is why you will see on the transfers received that their transfers are lower than projected, because we are saying to SANRAL before any further transfers can be made, they have to utilize the existing surpluses that they have. So SANRAL, and they are picking up from an expenditure point of view, as is shown in the bottom half of the stable, specifically around maintenance. So that sits in the goods and services budget, but CapEx is lagging a little bit behind. And by managing SANRAL's future transfers relative to how it winds down its existing cash surpluses, allows for us to kind of create some flexibility in the budget that helps in the 2026 year, as shown in the Adjusted Appropriation Act, to deal with some of the pressures that PRASA faces. I'm not going to, so SARS is the last one. So for SARS, transfers in line with forecasts, exactly in the way that we had projected it. And expenditure is slightly ahead, mostly on compensation of employees. And that is really due to the appointment of temporary employees for the Revenue Recovery Program and the payment of performance bonuses. SASSA is I think this is going to be the last one, Chair, we can see that revenue is in line with projections, so the transfers are made as planned, and payments are even though from the department side, we saw faster than projected spending on the SRD, from a payments point of view within SASSA, this is slightly lower than projected. And there's a couple of reasons why the expenditure is, why you see that. So even though, and it's mostly within goods and services, so this is about the operations of SASSA more than it is about the transfers that it then makes to households. And maybe I should, okay, let's do the last one, because the last big one is on the unemployment insurance fund. And one of the things we should be worried about in the unemployment insurance fund is around the benefit payments. So the transfers that you see, so transfers and subsidies are transfers to households for benefit payments. That is 3.2 billion rand lower than projected in the second quarter. And that is mostly because of the planned automation of the reassessment payments that they're making, and they're not able to, and as a result, they're not able to catch up in the way that they expected to do, but we should see some improvements in the third quarter. Chair, I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's really helpful. I'm going to open the floor up to members to ask questions. And I think what we will do is just go through a series of questions with members. And then we will have responses from National Treasury at the end of that, just because of the nature of the information, and being an online platform makes it difficult to put some when we normally group responses as we go. So I'm going to allow for members just to keep going. I see Honorable Bateman, your hand is up. Can I recognize further members as we go? Honorable Gamede, you are next. Honorable Wakelin, you'll be next. Mkonto, Honorable Galega Mazibuko, Honorable Ntuli, Mwali, and Sigede. And then under the Kwangwa as we go. Let me start, given that there are so many questions on the go, let me allow for Honorable Bateman to go. Honorable Bateman, you can go.
Thanks very much, Honourable Chair, and good morning to all my honourable member colleagues, and thank you very much to all of those from National Treasury who are present and who presented. Number of questions and very useful, interesting presentation. I think as a general comment, it would be helpful to me if the explanations gave us a bit more of a cue as to which explanations are seen to be problematic by National Treasury, and where there are interventions that are being undertaken by the executive in some way to address the problems. So just to be able to get a little bit more of a steer so as to how to interpret the explanations. It's not always totally clear. So that's just a general comment. Perhaps even like a flagging system, something like that. If something is a very major problem, give it like a red light. If something's cautionary, give it an orange light. And if it's just for information and it should resolve itself, not a matter of concern, maybe just give it a green light next to the explanation so we can get a feel for how National Treasury is perceiving the different variances and where there's intervention that's required and what intervention is being undertaken. So that's just a little bit of feedback. First question, on the defense, where we seem to have this overspending problem year after year after year, I'd like to understand how it's possible that the problem repeats itself year after year after year. And then on Eskom, so there was the point made that Eskom may not implement remuneration adjustments that negatively affect its overall financial position and sustainability. That was one of the conditions of the debt relief bill. I'd like to know if National Treasury has interrogated why Eskom's employee benefits increased by 37% in the last 2 years. Next point is, again, around Eskom, there's this concern that Eskom has pushed its prices up, I think 27% in the last 2 years, and that's off the back of many above inflation increases. And now we're seeing it losing customers because it's just not competitive against private solutions. And so there's a concern here around whether Eskom's getting itself into an unsustainable space with the market becoming less regulated and more competition. Is National Treasury, what's National Treasury's view on this? Is there a concern? And then related to that is if they do need to reinvent how they produce energy to do it more cost effectively, they're quite constrained what they can and can't do because of the conditions in terms of the Debt Relief Act and the balance sheet pressures that they find themselves. So although on the one hand, from a financial management perspective, it makes sense to have very tight conditions on Eskom, what they can and can't do. And there's obviously a lot of trust that needs to be regained in terms of how Eskom functions. We still don't have clean audit reports and so on. So there are issues. I understand that need for constraints on Eskom. But at the same time, is there a concern that we're perhaps forcing them down a path operationally and in terms of the decisions they make in terms of, like, for example, clean energy transitions and innovation of how they do business, that are actually forcing them in a way to continue to produce electricity at an unaffordable price, and that actually, in a sense, they're in a something of a death spiral from an operational perspective. So I'd like to know if there are any insights from National Treasury on that. Then it's concerning moving on to SAA. It's concerning to see the losses appearing again in SAA. It had seemed like we were getting some good news out of Eskom now, out of SAA, and now it seems like we're seeing losses again. What are the projections looking like for 2026? What is the turnaround plan? I think we need more information and to get a better sense of what the risk is here to the fiscus. Again, this issue of the 1 billion rand that's owed by Zimbabwe, the customs union, as I understand, we pay quite a lot of money to neighboring countries in terms of our budget. And I'm just wondering whether we can't get our lawyers onto this and find a way to offset the money that's owed to SAA, which is our entity, effectively, against the money that we're paying in customs union payments. It doesn't make sense if there's billions flowing out of the right hand that the left hand can't receive what's due. Has National Treasury looked into that? Could you give some feedback on that? If that's going to make a big boost for SAA, then I think we should try and help them get their money. Then moving on to Transnet, what is the expected net cost to the fiscus of the guarantees that have been issued? How much are we expecting to expend? And the same question for Denel. What's the expected outflows for those guarantees? And then I see there's a pipeline of 36.5 billion. I presume that's an unweighted pipeline. Can you give us the probability weighted pipeline for Denel in terms of a projection of revenues for the next 12 months? And you speak also of chasing opportunities there with probabilities exceeding 50%. What is the value of the pipeline opportunities that exceed 50%? And also, what is the specific nature of those sales where Denel probability exceeds 50%? Just getting a better understanding of where Denel's sweet spot is and where it's expecting to receive sales. What kinds of business are we talking in terms of the specifics? Sorry, getting there. Public entities. There's a concern about National Treasury not really having full transparency over what's going on in terms of the finances of the public entities because of disparate systems. And are there plans afoot to standardize the accounting and the payroll systems so that National Treasury can get full transparency across the whole of the public sector and not just the national departments? And I think there are plans around provinces, but to what extent is that going to be pushed out through to municipalities and also other public entities? On NSFAS, the overspending of 10 billion is not sustainable. I think we need more information as to how they plan to address this in the next year. if they're planning to use up the reserves, I mean, that's not going to, those reserves are not going to last forever. So we need more information around their financial position and what the future looks like for NSFAS funding. I did flag this last year, I'm pretty sure, as a concern. So it's not surprising to me to see this. I was assured last year it was all going to be sorted out. It doesn't look like it has been sorted out. It looks like there's still problems. So we need more information there to assess that and find out what steps are being taken to rectify the problems. I think we need projections on the road accident fund for the next 5 years. We read in the press the reports of unfunded liabilities, the risks of those crystallizing. We need to, as appropriations, understand what the outlook is for the next 5 years and how that's going to affect our budgets. The same thing with SANRail. Are we expecting additional unbudgeted costs? UIFW for Parliament, could you provide details of additional travel expenditure and the financial loss due to fraudulent payments? On correctional services, details of the cancellation of travelling officials not reporting to the booked hotel and interest charged for late payments or non-compliance. If you could provide details of that. Sorry, 3 to go, very short. UIFW on defence, please provide details of the irregular lease. On DIRCO, who was responsible for frequent post facto approvals without prior approvals? What were the payments for? What were the amounts? And on COGTA, please provide details of certain procurement leases and ICT-related transactions which did not fully comply with prescribed procedures, including competitive bidding and approval processes. Chair, I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Bacon. Honorable Gamete.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Sibonge kakhulu sashayelela kahle lo mcimbi esikuwo. Chairperson, the ESCOM has reported year-to-date profit of 27.6 billion, paints a perceptive picture, far from beacon of financial health. This profit is an accounting illusion, primarily fueled by steep tariff hikes of 12.74%. The harsh reality, Chairperson, is a utility drowning in systemic financial instability, with municipal area debts skyrocketing to 10.5 billion rands. This isn't just a commercial viability; it's a desperate reliance on colossal of 254 billion government debt relief package, merely to keep its head above water and meet basic interest and capital obligation. I just want to find out if the government debt relief strategy for ESCOM merely a preludious deferral of an inevitable fiscal reckoning, with sales volume plummeting due to a 5.7% reduction in demand and the relentless surge of private solar self-generation. How long can the lifeline truly hold before the entire system buckles? Let me quickly go to the second one, Chairperson, which deals more with the fiscal. This report lays a bare chronic disconnect between departmental mandates and fiscal responsibility. The Department of Defense, for instance, consistently blows past its approved compensation of employees ceiling. This isn't just an accounting error. It's actually a glaring symptom of budgetary framework failing to enforce essential structural reforms in high-spending departments, inevitably leading to unauthorized or irregular expenditure patterns. Why do critical departments like higher education and training and also the cooperative governance consistently underspend due to non-compliance or a lack of progress reports What does this chronic underperformance reveal about the state's actual administrative capacity to deliver vital services, even when the funds are readily available? Chairperson, I do have my own recommendations, but I'm a bit skeptical to just share them now because I don't want my recommendation to influence maybe the response or the thinking of the National Treasury. I would like to stop there for now, Chairperson. Thank you very much for an opportunity.
Ngiyabonga mhlonishwa and sizoyizwa kahle i-recommendation masesiqedile sibone ukuthi sisebenza kanjani. Honorable Waitlin, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Am I audible and visible?
You are both those things.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, it's to me, although this is Q3 and Q2 feedback, it's very clear to me that this is a sorry state of affairs on both sides. If I could maybe just start with a few comments and questions. The first one relates to, originally, I have submitted a very strong and a lengthy request around the TARS program and the work that has been done around that, and we requested a full report on a number of issues. I have not received anything from National Treasury on this matter. And my request then is further to, similar to what I submitted to the Minister, when can we expect that the TARS program will be implemented and we can see the reason why it's necessary, not just at national, but also at SOEs and municipalities. If they could just get me clarity on that and also provide me, based on my submission, I've made a full report where we are and what is the expectation with TARS and how does the program work, just in general. Chair, then let me get into the issues that is of concern. The first one I would like to get out, and I'd like to have an understanding first before I ask the deeper question, is around the defence exceeding the cost of employment ceilings. I don't understand, what does it mean? Does it mean that they have overspent on in employment compensation without authorization? So I just need to get clarity. What did it mean? And what was National Treasury's intervention in all of these matters? My focus this morning in all these matters is particularly around National Treasury's position and focus and their own action in all of these matters, if they could maybe relate back on that. Then, Chair, you hear me hopping on this matter since last year, and these are two matters. There's only two problems. The one is the project management, in particular around infrastructure and the underspending and the wasteful expenditure around project management. And the second matter is around contract management and contracts that are not signed. And we see this again, invoices are late, the systems that are not integrated. These are all just basic governance failures. My question to National Treasury is, what is your intervention in particular around project management and contract management as a national department to assist and make sure that they get done properly, just in general? Chair, then I just would like to put the bottom line to me is that the issue is not how much we spend, is that the state cannot spend effectively, and that brings me back to the whole TARS conversation. My view is that going forward, we're going to spend more time in that arena to ensure that funds must be spent adequately, enough, and on time, because currently it is either to spend too late, it's too early, or it doesn't get spent at all. Chair, then on Eskom. And I asked this question to Eskom, and I made the comment to say that they are suffering from monopoly hangover. They were obviously not surprised or happy with that comment. But the point I want to leave with National Treasury is, where are they as National Treasury and their intervention and hands on the whole unbundling intervention from National Treasury's side? Because it's clear that their business model is busy eroding. And they're not going to be sustainable, and particularly around the revenue management. Apart from municipalities, there's a whole decline of revenue purely because people have looked at alternatives. And my question to is National Treasury, are they involved in the unbundling intervention, and what is their hands on this matter? Then, Chair, obviously, if I go down to all the SOEs, to me it's only clear, Chair, that the real issue is the long-term sustainability. the fiscal exposure and economic impact on all of those SOEs. Chair, Eskom is stabilizing, but it's structurally busy getting weakened because of the unbundling not happening quick enough. SAA is very fragile and it's not commercial viable. And brings me to the second question: what has National Treasury done to assist SAA with partnership agreements? I know that there was a failed partnership. Is there any further engagements with partners to make SAA sustainable going into the future? Then we know that Transnet is a major economic and fiscal risk. I don't actually want to speak to PRASA. You know my position on PRASA. There's a matter of PRASA that we need to deal with. And then Denel is financially vulnerable and dependent on external support. Chair, my big takeaway is, when are we going to implement, and what is National Treasury's effective implementation and their own hands on these issues, as opposed to just reporting on it and let these departments run on their own course? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Waitlin. Let me recognize Honorable Mkhonto.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning to you, Chair, and honorable members, and our colleagues from the National Treasury. Chair, I have a challenge of network. Can I please switch off my video?
No, that's fine, Honorable Member.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, we welcome the presentation from the National Treasury. I will have questions mixed with comments. I hope they will be able to identify the questions that they have to respond on. Chair, I will start with the a higher education under expenditure due to the delay in receiving reports from the institutions before they dish out the grants for capacity development. Can we get, is it possible to get as to which institutions are responsible for this? Because, Chair, it means in those institutions, their capacity building plans are not implemented. And how do they, as an academic institution, carry out their responsibilities if they lack on capacity? Because according to me, they have to lead in a capacity building and also assist other institutions that are not academic. The second one, Chair, is the land reform under expenditure due to non-agreements between land owners and a government as a buyer. Who is the land valuer? Who is doing the land valuation? And what are the reasons behind the landowners not agreeing with the land valuation reports? Are they saying it is low? Are they saying it is very high? What exactly is happening? Because, Chair, this is a very matter that is having a high public interest. People need land to develop themselves. People need land to contribute in the food security of this country and other developments. And then, Chair, according to the presentation, there is a change in the name of the education infrastructure grant. It's just that I did not get it. Where does it come from and where is it going? But is it just the change of the name, or even the strategy and the planning has changed, because just changing the name will never change the underperformance of related to the projects that are there in the school infrastructure development. The last one, Chair, will be with the SAA. Do we as South Africa have any international relations policies that can be implemented to recover what Zimbabwe owes South Africa? How have they been persuaded to pay? Have we brought in the international relations department to make sure that, because it has been long, Chair, that we are told that Zimbabwe owes SAA, and this is quite a lot of money. And how are the relations now after they have shown that they are reluctant to honor their financial agreements with SAA? What is going on now? Is their relations still going on? And how exactly do we plan to recover what is owed to SAA? Thank you, Chair.
Siyabonga, Honorable Mkhonto. Let me recognize Honorable Galega Mazibuko. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I'm in the rural areas of Mzimkhulu. May I request not to open my video, because I'm standing at some corner so that I can be audible.
No, it is understandable, Honorable Member. I know you are busy with a ritual, so I will allow you to proceed.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, one appreciates the fact that Eskom is improving its efficiency with an improved energy availability factor. However, Chair, I think more maintenance is required to improve the efficiency of plants. And the major risk in this is the municipal debt, which continues to increase even with the interventions that have been applied, but it continues to increase. And my question would be, what interventions are required then to significantly reduce the cost of operating power stations, which have been impacted by a history of poor workmanship in various maintenance projects and due to inflated procurement costs? And what are the drivers for the lower expenditure on IPP open cycle gas turbines by 1 billion as reported by the presentation, which amounts to 39%? And Chair, I must say that the non-payment of national health laboratory services by provinces is a worrying factor. And I would like to know, Chair, what needs to be done for the provinces to pay this service, because if it continues like it is reported, it is creating more problems. And Chair, on the quarterly reports, both the second and the third quarter, I am worried about the water and sanitation transfers and spending for capital assets that are linked to specific projects which are ahead of schedule or behind schedule. And did the National Treasury monitor that the funds were used for the intended purposes by recipients? And Chair, noting that the Department of Culture reduced the projected spending due to non-compliance with conditions, what is the profile of these municipalities? And what is the major aspect for these municipalities not to comply or complied with? And My questions on the second quarter report, Chair. What are the accountability limitations and risks of data provided by the public entities not being on the basic accounting system and thus cannot be verified? And does this create a gap in information to timelessly analyze this data? And what measures then, if yes, are being implemented to close this gap? And does the gap in the budget program structure require the National Treasury or Accounting Standards Board to expand classifications to enable and enhance accounting of spending? And which accounting system, Chair, is required for public entities, as the Road Accident Fund is also facing these accounting challenges as reported on an accrual or cash-based system? Which system does the National Treasury recommend? And do we need a review of standards? And my last question is quite a lot of information. Chair, I'm not even sure what is the time allocation, but let me ask the last question. What is the position of the National Treasury on all listed challenges of reporting? And what is the progress of these interventions? Because I think in the last term, we, National Treasury, all reported the same challenges. And I would really want to know what is the progress of the interventions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Masibuko. Honorable Ntuli.
Thank you very much, Chair, and greetings to you, Chair, and our presenters. We welcome the presentations. One would like, I think I'm also in the rural, deep rural areas of Mtuba. I think I need to switch off the video because network is not good, it's challenging. I request, Chair. Oh,
No, you can proceed. You can proceed. Tswela pele mme re a tseba hore o mahaeng.
Okay. Am I still audible, Chair? And
You
everyone?
are. You can proceed. Yes, yes, you can proceed.
Thank you very much, Chair. My first question is on the South African Airways. Is that South African Airways is on a growth path with the entity increasing its fleet from 6 in 2021 to currently 21 aircraft with an intention of growing the fleet to 54. SAA is also managing its cost structure in an effective manner that has a loss primarily due to SAA is not operating all planned routes and frequencies. This reflects the need to increase the capacity of SAA, requiring capitalization and lower average fares compared to budget. Lower than expected average load factors with domestic travel at 69% and regional travel at 62%, while international travel recorded a higher load factor of 72%. Now, I would like to ask that, noting that SA is making a loss due to not operating all planned routes and frequencies, what is the plan of the National Treasury to support SAA to increase its fleet in the short term, to optimize its revenue generating capacity, and to place it on a growth path? Has the SAA board requested additional funding to grow in the airline? And on the second and third quarter reports, I would like to ask the following question, that noting that the social relief of distress had more approvals and overspent by over 800 million. What is the basis of the decline and in SRT allocations in the current budget, despite a pattern of increasing allocations as reflected in Q3 of the previous financial year? What was the purpose of the previously unspent funds by the defense, which required usage after the appointment of the Reserve Force Council chairperson? And the last on the or next, not exactly the last one, but on the Q2 report, I would also like to ask that with regards to NSFAS financial position and the increasing demand for higher education, what is the extent of alleviation of allocation pressures from its own reserves? The financial sustainability of PRASA is there, as it is dependent on transfers from the Department of Income. What are the major backlogs in commuter railroads? And if the functionality is significantly low, what strategy is being implemented to ensure priority and high volumes routes are efficient in the short term? With regard to the SANRAL accelerated spending, is this for services provided and completed or ongoing projects? And also one chair would like to raise a very, very frustrating concern to learn about this unauthorized, irregular, and fruitless expenditure, where on transport, the expenditure is related to the Nelson Mandela event, which was incurred in the manner which was not aligned and with the approved purpose of the vote, also on the traditional affairs, also on basic education. One would like to have the concern of that fruitless expenditure on the cancellation of projects by provincial departments, which were caused by the duplication of awards and multiple implementing agents, and also on the land reform and rural development, which is mainly from late payments on invoices beyond the required 30-day period, leading to interest charges of rates and taxes. And again, the international relations, which is the and cooperation, which is the highest, and it's mainly due to weakness in financial controls, unutilized properties, and many others, which clearly indicates the high level of incompetence. And again, is in that office, and on the correctional services and social development are mostly due to cancellation of traveling, of officials not reporting to the hotel booked, and also the same story of late payments, non-compliance, which accrue interest. I would like to say, Chair, it is very unfortunate that there can be millions which goes down the drain in this fashion, while people here in our republic really is very, very frustrating to taxpayers and all of us as South Africans. I thank you.
Let me recognize Honorable Mwali. You can proceed from there. Thank you, Honorable Ntuli.
Thank you,
No,
Chair.
thank you so much, Chairperson. I would not want to repeat what other members have covered already, but I want to mention the fact that COGTA is underspending 4.1 billion. Chair, this underspending is on a municipality MIC grant or the MIC grant and the withholding of some equitable share. Local government, Chair, is at the coal face of service delivery. And I would really want to know from National Treasury, besides withholding this grant, what else or what other interventions have they or are they embarking on assisting local government? Because really, from where I'm sitting, Chairperson, there's a serious problem in the municipalities, more especially maladministration. Because if you look at it carefully, you'd find that the issues here is not really that there is a shortage of funding from where I'm sitting, because we're advocating that local government should be getting a more allocation. However, while we are advocating for that, but by looking at how they're administrating what they are receiving at the moment, really there's a serious problem, Chair, and it ends up National Treasury having to withhold having to withhold these grants and having to withhold equitable share. And the byproduct of that is service delivery to the people who are supposed to be getting water infrastructure, who are supposed to be getting electricity infrastructure, who are supposed to be getting services from the municipalities. 31 years to democracy, Chairperson, there are some people who are still living without electricity and water running into their yards. But if you see a municipality, or if you see 4.1 billion being returned back to National Treasury as a result of underspending, really, it doesn't really sit well with us representative of our people who are actually complaining on a daily basis, or who require these services on a daily basis. Chair, so I want to know what is from National Treasury that they are doing to try and assist this, but this is a pure incompetent maladministration, corruption, and some of the contributing factors is political instabilities that we've observed in these municipalities, Chair. And then we go to higher education, Chair. There's a university capacity development grant delays that have been observed, as a result of delays in this this grant. Therefore, there was this underspending of 3.1 billion. Chair, this this comes at the time where, when you're asking the department, are you able to accommodate all the students that have passed matric for tertiary education? The department can't. The department is having a huge shortage on accommodation, and even opted for private accommodations because they can't actually take in the number of students that needs accommodation. But if you see such grants being, you see such underspending on grants, where else they should be directed on infrastructure on these institutions, and then being so that these institutions will be able to accommodate the number of students that they need to. Really, this really is another blow on the faces of many South Africans who need this assistance. And these delays really are pure governance issues and incompetence in the running of these institutions. And also on transport, the non-payment to SANRAL, that as a result then leads to non-payment of contractors who are working, who are actually are working for or are providing services to the department. Really, Chair, the backlog that is sitting with the Department of Transport, it's really crazy. So if you see such being this 3.3 billion underspending, is another blow to the faces of the many contractors that have not been paid. And then one last point, Chair. Basic education, we sat with them and they told us there's some shortages also on the funding for transport services for scholar transport, but there's a 3.3 billion underspending on the Department of Transport. So how then does National Treasury assist, besides just withdrawing as a result of laws and regulations? How does then they assist with these departments that have so much underspending? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Skede, and then Kwankwa and Siade, but we can keep going. Honorable Skede.
No, thank you, Chair. Can I put off my video, Chair?
Well, it seems fashionable, so sure, but proceed.
No, thanks, Chair. Chair, mine will be, let me also welcome the presentation. But my first question will be on Denel, Chair. Denel realizes an operating loss of 239 million, which is marginally higher than the budgeted loss of 234 million, due to the impact of lower top-line revenue, delayed execution of key projects, and reduced production volumes across several divisions, constrained overall profitability. Denel's operating loss of 239 million improved substantially when the 607 million year-to-date contribution from its associated companies was considered. As a result, Denel reported a profit after tax of 234 million, with a potential overall value of opportunities in the pipeline in excess of 36.5 billion. What is the plan of Denel to optimize these opportunities, and what impact can they have on the turnaround and financial sustainability of Denel? And noting that Denel's guarantee from the National Treasury is close to depleted and that the minister is approving support for particular projects, is the National Treasury prepared to support Denel with regards to the pipeline in excess of 36.5 billion to ensure the entity does not lose the opportunity cost of not optimizing on the opportunities? And on the Q3, Chair, and Q2, noting that the Department of Transport was planning to allocate funds intended for SANRAL to PRASA, what is the impact of the reallocation by the department, and is SANRAL no longer in need of allocated budget? And with regards to the underspending of the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development due to negotiations of land purchases, what mechanisms are in place with the department and the National Treasury to ensure that expenditure linked to negotiations is timely reallocated in a circumstance of a deadlock to ensure appropriate funds are optimally used by the departments? And my last three questions, Chair, with regard to most underspending, it is linked to compensate for delayed projects, implementations. Does the National Treasury monitor implementation of service level agreements, contract management measures in circumstances of delayed project implementation by contractors to ensure consequence management and accountability of outsourced services? And lastly, Chair, with regards to the duplication of projects, with regards to the duplication of project awards to multiple implementation agents by the Department of Education, what losses have been suffered and what measures are taken to ensure consequence management and recoup of funds if applicable? And my last question, Chair, when non-compliance with PFMA and other regulations is identified, what measures have been implemented to ensure consequence management and recoup of funds if applicable? That's my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Let me recognize Honorable Kwankwa.
Chairperson, same request as Honorable Michael Zibuko for the reason I sent to you via WhatsApp. I want to focus mainly on, I want to start with Denel. You know, I have a challenge personally with the pipeline business. I mean, it's been a story of Denel for the longest period. I mean, even when we had the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises, I mean, the pipeline business would always send around 20, 30 billion rands. But from where I'm sitting, that has never materialized. I want to ask a question. I mean, I'm an ex-banker. One of the things we have to do in banking would be to go to a sales meeting and talk about pipeline business. And often what would happen in those days in order for you not to worry about your managers about your performance, you'd start talking about your pipeline business, at times even inflating it. How credible is this pipeline business for? It's a question. Have they done a proper assessment of the quality of the pipeline business and the ability of Denel to convert it? I make this point mindful of the fact that in the majority of instances, you might find that Denel lacks the necessary working capital to procure inputs or even restart production lines. I remember back in the days they needed money to be able to produce more bullets. I mean, that was outsourced at some point. So has National Treasury actually checked the quality of this pipeline business, whether they will be able to convert it, and whether it's not just speculative leads or expressions of interest from, say, potential buyers or requests for information. Because, at times managers would inflate deliberately, would inflate the pipeline business in order to try and justify funding requests or bailouts in the context of denial. Because from where we're sitting, it would make better sense once that has been done to check as to whether this pipeline business is something that is realizable realistically, so that National Treasury then would be able to help with the working capital to make it possible, as almost like investing in a business where you expect immediate returns if the pipeline business, because it might help us if we're able to do that to try and resolve some of the funding challenges that Denel is probably going through and experiencing. Back in the days when SAA still accounted to the, I think it's a point which is also covered by, was covered by Honorable Bateman in the SOEs, I beg your pardon, in the Public Enterprises Committee, primarily dealing with I think the amount was back then 300 million rands. I'm shocked to see that it has now escalated to 1 billion rands, and we have not been able to recover it. Back then, there was talk about, similar to what Honorable Bateman is talking about, SACU, but there were talks about offsetting arrangements. During the bilateral trade negotiations between South Africa and Zimbabwe, so that there did not really need to be a transfer of funds from Zimbabwe, but there could be an offsetting arrangement. There was talk even back then of engaging, I think it was the International Air Transport Association, to try and mitigate or help, because it serves as an important multilateral body insofar as this is concerned. So I want to find out whether any of that had been done. If it has not been done, why not? What are the issues? And why have it taken so long for the amount to, it was initially 300 million rands, and then it escalated to 1 billion rands. I mean, over what period? What were the causes? How can this be prevented? How can we recover it as soon as possible? SAA in particular, I want to also cite one of the issues, which is, I think, a major contributing factor. You've highlighted the load factor, which is passenger occupancy. But one doesn't get a sense of this passenger occupancy rather across routes and how it compares to industry benchmarks and how it compares with other competitors in the market, to see how well or badly they are performing and be able to understand what could be the reasons for that. From where I'm sitting, one of the contributing factors might be the on-time performance of SAA. It's slightly above. It's improved tremendously from where it was in the past, but it still leaves much to be desired. The on-time performance. I want to also consider one of the issues is when they had to scale back or scale down some of the routes, especially the international ones. They would check which routes were making losses, right? Which is your route network. Which routes were consistently making losses? What were the reasons? Has that been conducted with the current performance of SAA? I feel that the strategy is not really clear enough as to what segment of the market SAA is trying to serve. Sometimes you have what you could call low-cost airlines operating at the same route, some of them which are, I think, are leased from Turkey. There's one aircraft which is leased from Turkey. It's, when you look at it, it's exactly the same as your fly-safe fare. And then in the same route, you have different SAA the normal aircrafts that as a whichever business class, so in which you can't use the same entity to try and provide you have to have a strategy that is similar to when you differentiated your strategy by having a mango that focuses on low-cost airlines. I had thought that for smaller routes such as the Eastern Cape, where there's absolutely no competition, and other routes where FlySafair is charging people exorbitant amount of monies to be able to access air travel, that your SA Express, which in the past operated in smaller routes, would be incorporated into the broader SAA network to have a fairly differentiated strategy that would enable you to serve other routes and so on. Has any of those considerations been made, and how far is that process? Chair, when it comes to Eskom, I struggle. Honorable Gamede is quite correct in one respect that we can celebrate that there's some improved efficiency insofar as Eskom is concerned, but a lot of their profitability has to do with above inflation increases that have to do with the electricity prices. But what is not clear in terms of the Eskom strategy, even when they explained it in the past, is that what are the primary cost drivers? How can some of the cost drivers, because it can't be the same, the issue cannot be the same as the pre load shedding era and during the load shedding period where the diesel usage and other issues that were a challenge. If there's efficiency, we need to know how are they managing their costs insofar as trying to make sure that they are able to pass over some of the savings to the market and to the poor in particular, which has not been happening. So while we might celebrate the improvement in that there has been no load shedding for a while, I think we need to scrutinize the financial statements of Eskom and the financial performance and the entire governance model of Eskom to see whether there are any cost savings that can be made for the poor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And then lastly, Honourable Siati.
Thank you, Chair. Greetings to officials online, all honourable members. Chair, I'm going to request also that I'm not using the video, and so I only have two questions. I have one on National Treasury. Yeah, both of them actually. So I just wanted to ask, is the National Treasury convinced that the compensation fund has an adequate system to effectively disburse funds? Also noting its very high vacancy in its ICT system. Then the second one would be on the slide 60 on the NRF. Why is the National Treasury referring to the increased revenue as an underspending of 525 million rands? Those are my two inquiries. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, honourable members. I won't add to many more of the questions because some of them I think will need to get written responses to. It obviously the question around focused on the Eskom debt relief program. I'm wanting to get a bit of an understanding, given that municipal debt is escalating, what contingency measures are being taken preemptively to try and deal with that situation, because that feels like unlike a PRASA train, it's coming down the track, and I'm not sure that the left hand of municipalities, SALGA, and government knows what the right hand of Eskom, etc., is doing. And so I just am anxious that the debt relief program assumptions going over the long term aren't going to hold. And then, I mean, this is not National Treasury's problem. It is just the nature of some of the administrative burdens that naturally, when you've got poor officials in certain departments, the consequences are quite severe. So I'm afraid some of the questions about hotels being booked, etc., really, and not being honored, speak to administrative capacity within the departments, and that is a hard one to manage. But I'd like to understand what other mechanisms can National Treasury use in this regard. But Ulrike, I'm going to allow your team to respond. You can cluster the questions, noting that some can be responded to in a written format. I'm conscious of time, so if we can try and not have to, I mean, obviously some of the questions were grouped, they can be grouped, and then we can respond on that basis. Thank you so much.
The ALM team on all the stuff on state-owned companies, and then we'll go sector by sector on the expenditures in national departments and the Schedule 3A public entities. So over to you, Ramesh.
Thanks, Ulrika. Thanks, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members for the great questions. I think I'm just going to basically give some overview in terms of just the broad responses to some of the questions. I've actually clustered them as well. And then thereafter, I'll ask Lungelo, who's responsible for Eskom, Modisa responsible for Transnet, and Tulufelo responsible for Denel, just to come in and augment where I've missed out on some of the responses. So I think just in terms of some of the broad responses, I think there were a few questions on just around Eskom and our oversight in terms of the detail behind the cost drivers, in terms of the employee benefits and so forth. So I think here basically what we are responsible for is we don't get into the operational details behind some of the cost drivers, but obviously we do know that from an Eskom point of view, there are significant cost drivers, which is the primary costs in terms of energy costs and your employee costs. Obviously, we haven't drilled down into the actual employee costs in terms of them increasing by over 32, by over 37% over the 2 years. But I think our condition is quite clear to say that any increases shouldn't negatively impact the financial sustainability of Eskom and also the debt relief package here as well. I think just in terms of just broad questions around SAA as well, I think here what's important to just to highlight as well is and it also applies to I think Denel. So I think here from a corporate plan perspective, obviously there are questions about future projections, about what do we as Treasury or what our views are in terms of the pipeline, in terms of the revenue forecast going forward. So we are in the process now of, obviously, we have received some of the corporate plans. We're busy analyzing them. Some of them are quite market sensitive information, so we haven't actually got through that analysis yet. So I think that detail will, I think we will probably need to engage with Eskom, with SAA and with Denel, just around whether we can share some of that, that analysis with yourselves, as honorable committee and members as well. So we just need to get that go ahead as well. And it may also help that we also invite the likes of Eskom, Transnet, SAA, just to come and present that as well. I think that'll be good as well. I think the other point is just around Denel. I think what we've seen is that we are struggling to have our monthly monitoring meetings with them. So we've been sending a few letters. There's been a bit of back and forth. So we haven't got that closer oversight over Denel as we have with Transnet and Eskom and SAA. So I think that's a challenge that we're having with DoD. So we're just firming up and just making sure that on the guarantee framework agreement conditions for the 660 million rand Oman contract, that we enforce that. So there's been a back and forth. So we will raise that with our minister and with our principals at DoD, just to ensure that we have that closer monitoring as well. I think just there were a few questions around the Zimbabwe 1 billion rand that is still stuck in Zimbabwe. So we've been having a few, there's been a few exchanges between the Minister of Finance and the former minister from DPE, and more recently, as in I think August last year, where there was a response to DIRCO around how can National Treasury assist. And our minister has written to DIRCO, to a Minister of Transport, to say that we need to unpack how do we then look at roles and see how we can have the responsibilities between DIRCO, Treasury, DOT, and try and resolve this matter. So we are waiting for responses around how do we proceed. But we as Treasury are willing to assist, and we have written to Minister Lamola and Minister Grisi around trying to find a solution, and how do we assign roles to the various role players in terms of addressing this. We as Treasury have also engaged with the various banks. SARB has also been engaging with SAA and with their counterparts as well, but unfortunately that has not worked. And I think the next phase, or the next process, or the next step in the process, is now to just ensure that we get everyone from DIRCO, DOT, assigned roles and responsibilities, and also SAA to deal with some of the issues around the funds stuck in Zimbabwe. I think just broadly, I think just around the question was posed around what is National Treasury's role in terms of the unbundling process. So as you would have noted from the President's SONA address, there is this task team that's been appointed by the President, and National Treasury is part of that task team. It's actually convened from a National Treasury perspective, jointly with the Presidency. We've, at this point, we've had our first meeting a few weeks back. We're having our second meeting this week, Thursday, I believe it is, and we've also requested information from Eskom, which they have already shared for us to go through the modeling process of just unpacking some of the financial implications of us unbundling and looking at different scenarios. So the World Bank is helping us with that process. So work is underway. We have we have a deadline to submit this work to the President by the end by the end of May. But obviously before that, we need to engage with the ministers from a technical task team perspective to ensure that there is support and buy-in, and then we will then present the report to the President at the end of May. I'm just looking at, just in terms of the Munich debt matters, Honourable Chair, I think it's important just to flag that our IGR team is not here, but I think in terms of the written responses, I think we will then be able to provide that response in terms of where we are or how we're dealing with some of the Munich debt matters. But I know that there is work in terms of the distribution agency agreements that the teams are working with together with Eskom and municipalities to try and arrest the increase in the Munich debt arrears. Because as you rightly pointed out, if you provide this 230 billion of support, you don't want to have a situation where where the Munich debt undoes basically the work of the Eskom debt relief package. So I think that's an important point, because also it may then you may find that a few years down the line that it then negatively impacts on the unbundling process, more specifically to distribution, as I've mentioned briefly in the presentation as well. I think just around the pipeline itself for Denel, I think that work we would need to undertake with the team from from Denel in terms of executing on the pipeline. We have worked with them many years around execution risk as well, and looking at how do we kind of crowd in some of the private sector players to also assist, and to also assist with packaging of some of the the pipeline projects. So I think that's going to be quite an important process for us as we reinstitute the monthly monitoring meeting. So that's going to be work in progress from the Denel team. I think let me then just I think, sorry, the one question I just also wanted to pick on is just on or flag basically, is this around the SAA partnership agreement. So here again, I think the responsibility of the partnership agreements lies more specifically with the DOT. So we are engaging with them. Obviously, the failed Takatso consortium process, is something that we don't want to go down that route again. So I think if we are going to reconsider some partnership agreements, looking at looking at private partners coming in, then I think we would need to work very closely with the DOT. So we have to work with them, and obviously, I think that's something we'll flag as well. With the DOT, but it's something that they're thinking about. But we haven't really taken that forward as of today. So I think the other question in terms of outflow of guarantees and what that would mean for government, I think it's important just to flag that in terms of the government guarantees, when Transnet raises debt, or be it Eskom, whoever it is, it's not a direct implication that the fiscus basically then provides as funding. It's basically the entities have this guarantee facility. They go to the banks or to the lenders, and they can use that to raise debt. And obviously, they draw down. It doesn't have an implication for the fiscus. However, where it does have an implication for the fiscus is where we have entities that cannot then repay the guaranteed debt, and then government needs to step in terms of settling that debt. And we have examples of Denel, of the post office, and SAA as well. So I think that's important to flag, that it doesn't necessarily have a negative impact, but where it has a negative impact is in terms of our stock of contingent liabilities. And obviously, we don't want that to materialize where entities cannot repay that debt. Let me just pause there, and let me hand over to Lungelo to deal with Eskom, Modisa on Transnet, and Sulufelo on Denel, just to pick and flag augment if there's anything I've missed out in terms of the detail. Thank you, Honorable Chair. Over to you, Lungelo.
Good morning, Chair and honorable members. I think Ravesh touched most of the Eskom issues, but just to add, I think in terms of the employee benefits, largely it relates to cost adjustments due to the agreements with the labor unions, and some of it relates to the production performance. Benefits, as you have seen the improvement in the technical performance of the power plants. So some of it's linked to that, and then some of it's linked to the headcount of Eskom due to the delay in coal decommission. Initially, the plan was to decommission the coal plants earlier, which meant there was going to be a cut in the headcount, but due to the delay in that, it means the headcount has then been sustained in that regard. So just on a high level, I just wanted to bring that color in terms of the employee benefits, and indeed we are monitoring it through the quarterly monthly meetings for the Eskom debt relief that we have with Eskom, and we had previously probed this overspend for detailed analysis in terms of what it comprises of, and this is just the color around it. And I think to the question around the Eskom business model, and around the production cost, given that the market is also changing, and how does Eskom sees that in terms of their production schedule, or in terms of their generation mix, production schedule. So as we are aware, currently Eskom, largely their production mix is coal-based, supplemented by IPPs. But indeed, Eskom is also looking at how they can actually bring more, renewables just from their side, renewable projects, ESCOM renewable projects, whether, through maybe a focused, company, a subsidiary that focuses purely on ESCOM green projects. And this is, honorable members, in light of the fact that ESCOM coal plants are old and they are due to be decommissioned. So we don't want a situation where you decommission a coal plant and you have no substituting, a generation plant. But in that regard, we are all aware that renewables are much more cost efficient. So ESCOM is actually currently working with the DEENT to see if they can't expedite or expand their ESCOM their renewable projects in that regard, just to supplement the IPPs and also take into account the fact that the market is changing, and also their coal plants are due to be decommissioned. And so we need to bring in more renewables just also from ESCOM side. And I think in terms of ESCOM's performance, yes, indeed, the current ESCOM's performance is supported by various drivers. Amongst the drivers is, of course, the ESCOM debt relief, which has allowed the entity to then be able to, manage their business such that they are able to pour more money on maintaining their coal plant, and therefore be able to improve their performance. But also, it's also true that some of it is also linked to just the tariff increase, not necessarily volume increase. And I think we may be aware that obviously the volume in decrease issue, is driven by a number of factors. But particularly 3 years ago, when we had the severe load shedding, some customers, have decided to go self-generation. And of course, the current Electricity Regulation Act, also the revised one also has included, more clauses around self-generation. So there is indeed that impact in terms of ESCOM's customers now being able to self-generate. But of course, maybe from a technical point of view, self-generation is not entirely for less costly sometimes compared to getting electricity from the electricity system. So there's always a balance when you are a customer in terms of whether you want to when you compare your cost of self-generation, compared to the cost that ESCOM produces by, which is why it's important for ESCOM to actually maybe start looking at more renewable generation, because that will lower their cost of production, and then they can then be able to compete with maybe self-generation in that regard. In terms of unbundling, I think Ravesh, you've covered us there. I can just mention that also, we National Treasury is also part of the independent transmission program, which is being developed by IPP and DEE as part of bringing, more investments in the transmission space of ESCOM. So that's also part of the work that we are working on around, assisting ESCOM move towards an unbundled state. I think there was an issue, I think you've covered the issue, Ravesh, around the Munich debt. We are working with IGR colleagues, which they are working with SALCA and DEE in terms of the interventions around that. But it is definitely a concern, particularly as Ravesh mentioned, as we unbundle these different entities, we find ourselves, each entity will then be exposed, will clearly be exposed in terms of the challenges, and particularly the distribution business is the one that is directly affected by Munich debt. Currently, as we are aware, Eskom as a monopoly, they are able to cross-subsidize each other, which then buffers the impact of the mini debt. But as we unbundle each entity, then the risks then become clear. I think that should be it. I can just cover one last point on OCGTs. Although we indicated the 1 billion usage in the current quarter, but I'd like to flag that this is actually lower than what Eskom had budgeted. In fact, Eskom is projecting less usage of OCGTs for this current year compared to last year. If I look at the numbers, I think this year they are projecting 8 billion, and last year it was around 13 billion. But the less usage is really due to improvement in coal plants of Eskom. And also maybe just to mention the IPPs, there also was less usage around that, but that's not necessarily due to just performance. It's just due to IPPs projects not coming on board on time. Maybe let me just stop there. I just wanted to bring that color, and thank you very much, honorable members. Ravesh.
Thanks, Lungelo. Modisa, if you can be brief as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Ravesh. Good morning, Honorable Chair. Good morning, honorable members. I'm going to be very brief. So I'm just going to add a bit of nuance on the point relating to the partnership agreement. So there's a two-layer to it. Ravesh touched on the fact that when we have to think about the strategic partnership at the equity level, it's a process that needs to be kickstarted as the Department of Transport in its capacity as a shareholder representative. So from our role as NT, we always play a much more role of providing a much more transactional advisory support around that. So all the responsibility relating to that element of partnerships, it's a process that primarily rests with the Minister of Transport. And there's another element as well, which relates to the fact that the airline does enter into a partnership agreement with the different stakeholders for the purpose of improving the revenue, the connectivity, and just the customer process as well. So the details of RAG that Laroche has touched is mostly commercially sensitive information, and it's mostly the responsibility of the SA board and the management, because it relates to the operational issues. We always shy away from the fact that we don't disclose such element of information, even once we have reviewed the corporate plan, because it has an implication on the if it can be disclosed on be disadvantageous to the airline in terms of the competition. And I think just the last point as well relating to that, yes, the airline does conduct a detailed network strategy, identifying which route is going to operate on and identify which road will be feeders in terms of the network densification around that. And also the details are provided to us via corporate plan. But again, it will be very important for the airline to really maybe take the honorable members through and discuss those elements, because it is best placed to be at liberty to disclose some of those commercially sensitive information, which can put the financial settlement of the airline into a bad path if most of its competitors know very well what is its strategy around its fleeting, its partnership, and its network identification approach. Just the last one, there isn't really expected outflow of the guarantee costs insofar as the guarantees are issued for Transnet. We manage that process carefully, and Transnet does not have any pending redemptions that can lead into the guarantee being called, and we have to make good as treasury in terms of meeting those payment obligations. Thanks, Ravesh. Over to you.
Thanks, Marisa. Last but not least, from our side, Tulufelo, are you covered?
Thanks, Ravesh. Morning, Chair and the honorable members. Yes, Ravesh, you've largely covered me on Denel. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Honorable Chair, we now hand over to Ulrika and team.
Good morning, it's Randani here. from Public Finance. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. I'm going to try and keep it brief. We are running out of time in terms of meeting-wise, Doc. So if you, yeah, let's try and keep it brief. You can proceed. I mean, the other responses can be in written format at the time. You can proceed.
Okay, thanks very much. Let me deal with the questions raised by Honorable Bateman and Gamet and Honorable Wakelin, talking to defense, COE. It has got a very long history, but I'll try to summarize. The problem started around 2017-18, when the department started incurring irregular expenditure, mainly because of COE, I think up until 2021-22. What that means is that the department augmented the COE budget without the approval of the National Treasury. That irregular expenditure then graduated into unauthorized expenditure, and it was audited as such. And what that means, Honorable Wakelin, is that the department spent the money it didn't have. So in the current financial year, if you look at slide number 11, you'll see that the actual head count is less than the target. And there is a vacancy of 436. And yet, if you look on the right-hand side of that slide, looking at the rands and cents, you will realize that they are overspending, meaning that they don't even have the money for those vacancies, meaning that they are sitting with unfunded posts. So what are we doing? There has been a series of engagement at different levels, ministers, DGs, and ourselves, in trying to come up with the solution, and not only focusing on COE, focusing on the whole budget of the defense force. For example, the defense review, it talks of expenditure composition of 40-30-30, 40 COE, 30 goods and services, and 30 capital. Right now, we are sitting at about, I think, 65, 23, 12 or so. So the early retirement without penalty, it was designed with labor-intensive department in mind, especially those ones experiencing budget shortfalls, so that department can be able to live within their means and at the same time be able to rejuvenate the force. Allow me to end here, Chair. That's in summary. There was also a question on Defense Force Council. That is the product of the statute, section 48. It's an advisory body to the Minister of Defense in respect of the force, especially the reserve force. Let me end here, Chair. Thanks very much.
Dr. Ndani, let me ask a quick question. Just in terms of the question that we put regarding the reform, is there room for reform in as far as the disaster relief fund is concerned? I mean, I appreciate the presentation that was put through and its governance framework. Is there room for that reform, or?
I'll leave that to for all regard to respond to.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chair. I'm just covering two questions of all of the questions that were raised. One relates to the 4.1 billion below projected spending in DCOG, and I'll also touch a bit on the Sunrun letter. Just to also remind honorable members that the 4.1 billion that we're talking about is not underspending yet, because they will only know the real underspending at the end of the financial year. This entails the amount that is not spent as projected, and part of the reason it's not spent is the withholding. The withholding happens as a measure to try and control and also discipline municipalities that are not following the DORA or are not spending accordingly. So you will find that at every given month, we have different amounts that are being withheld, and for different municipalities. So it changes every month, because once the municipality rectifies its action, then the funding is released. So the withholding is not a permanent process. So in this regard, you'll find that in Q4, we'll end up with a different number if we still end up with a significant number under withholding. As to what Treasury and DCOG are doing, there's a lot of capacity work that is being undertaken to support municipality. There's an oversight work that is driven by DCOG. there's also work to try and reform the grant system. That's why in some cases, which Ulrike has already referred to, you have some funds that are shifted to NIF 60 as a way of trying to ensure that national government is able to intervene directly through agents to help those municipalities that are struggling to implement the intervention. On the SANRAL matter, the issue here is not depriving SANRAL of its ability to implement project. Again, this was reflected in the presentation because SANRAL has sufficient amount in its balance sheet, has some bit of surplus in its balance sheet. The negotiation between SANRAL and Department of Transport was in such a way that was intended to help address some of the gaps within the sector. So the funding that was shifted from SANRAL is not an underspending per se, but was a measure to try and fill the gap that existed within the sector. In this case, to try and meet some of the gaps, operational gaps within PRASA. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Morning, Chair and honourable members. I'm going to respond to some of the questions related to higher education and the COM fund. Let me start with the compensation fund. So yes, we agree that well, we've pointed out too that the IT systems are inadequate and need to be upgraded, and also that the capacity needs to be improved. They agree too, and the compensation fund and the department have indicated that they are both being addressed as part of the unbundling process, which is at the moment the compensation fund and the Department of Employment Labour, they share some services, and this is being separated so that the compensation fund take full responsibility of their own IT, for example, and all the work of their own staff. And in that way, these capacity constraints are going to be addressed. And then just on the the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, yes, that is an unsustainable situation, but it was a once-off. Over-enrollment is largely responsible for the 10 billion over the period in 25-26. Further sustainability measures need to be implemented though, and I think the Department of Higher Education must lead in because that's really a policy decision. So between them and the scheme themselves, they need to address that. But certainly it's not a sustainable situation as it is in its current form. On the university capacity development grant, that detail we will send to you. But as my colleague just pointed out, the position you have that we reported on now is not an underspending. It is slow spending up to the 31st of December. And in fact, those funds have all been transferred to all the universities that they meant to have been transferred to in February already, once all the reports and so on have been received by the department. Then just the last point on the school infrastructure backlogs grant, it is being phased into the education infrastructure grant, where delivery there will be done by the provincial education departments that are closer to the schools where the backlogs exist, and the places where the backlogs exist. The EIG, the Education Infrastructure Grant, will now, from now onwards, have a backlogs component within it that is specific to address the backlogs in their provinces. And we feel that method of channeling the funds to where they need it and then implementing the projects by those closer to where the projects exist will improve the delivery ultimately. Thanks, Chair.
Good morning, Chairperson and honorable members. I will come in on the DECO, the question on DECO, and it was about the irregular expenditure. The short answer to the questions and comments is that the post facto approval was given by officials from DECO. I must say that most of the transactions or what is reported under irregular expenditure relates to the flouting of the supply chain rules, and how that dealt with is dependent on who has the approval or the authority to approve such transactions. In an instance where the approval lies with the accounting officer of a department, it is the department that has to deal with the transgressions. And in an instance where the authority lies with the National Treasury, it is a different division within the National Treasury, which would be the office, the Chief Procurement Office, that would deal with transgressions in that regard. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Honorable Chairperson and members. I'm going to reply to some of the questions that have been posed regarding the land valuation and land reform and some of the issues pertaining to the NRF. My name is Tobisa Magazi. On the land valuation question, the land identified for restitution and redistribution and tenure is valued by the Office of the Valuer General, which is an independent statutory body established in terms of the Property Valuation Act. These valuations take into account many considerations and factors which are prescribed in terms of legislation, which include the use of property and history of acquisitions, and the state investment and market value as part of the considerations, and market value not being one of the sole determinants in terms of that particular exercise. When it comes to the misalignment that has been highlighted by the members, yes, this is an acknowledged challenge, and which the department is actively working towards introducing corrective measures. And this is in the main, as already alluded by the members, is due to the misalignment between the state evaluation process and what the landowners' price expectations are, which has led to the protracted negotiations and underspending in certain instances. This is also further compounded by policy uncertainty, especially when it comes to the land acquisition and the compensation frameworks themselves. What has the department done to date? Because we're also asked Chair to reflect on some of the measures that have been introduced to address some of these operational issues. The department is working towards strengthening coordination with the Office of the Valuer General to improve the turnaround time and align the evaluation and negotiation process. There is also improvements that are going to be introduced in terms of the early identification and prioritization of land parcels, and the tightening around the planning and monitoring and project management. There was also a question that was asked, Chair, around the constraints broadly in terms of the delivery of restitution programs. And we do know as the National Treasury, and in recent time, we've also received correspondence to that effect from the department, wherein the department has highlighted some of the challenges in terms of the bulk payment system. And one of the challenges that they are not able to use this system as efficiently as intended to ensure that payment of restitution reaches beneficiaries at the expediency that it was required. Though it was a necessary reform as part of the issues needed to strengthen the governance, there are still challenges in terms of that, which might actually also lead to audit compliance, if not urgently stabilized. So to this effect, the department is engaging National Treasury to introduce interim solutions on how to improve the system of validation, and there will be feedback to that extent, possibly coming from the department. There was also an issue, Chair, that was highlighted in terms of slide number 60 in the presentation specific to the National Research Fund. I just want to highlight and just reiterate what has been stated in that slide, particularly around the reasons for overspending. The reasons are related to the South Africa's obligations as a founding member and the host of the SKA Observatory. Under the convention, South Africa obviously has to pay membership fees on an annual basis, which are assessed on a scale of assessment applicable to the country. Part of these obligations are, as a host, are to ensure that we provide the infrastructure necessary for this particular project, as well as provide site protection. These are unfortunately obligatory expenditures in terms of the treaty obligations itself. I will end there, Chair, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chair and members. My name is Lindy Mzangomo. I will be responding on the SRD grant. So the grant is not really growing faster than faster when compared to the previous years. Growth in payments is actually lower in comparison because by this time last year, payments of 27.2 billion had been made, whereas this year spending by third quarter spending has only been at 26.3 billion. So it just so happens that the department's projections for the third quarter are slightly lower than actual spending, but this is nothing to worry about. We also added 2.2 billion to the SRD budget in the adjustment budget. So, and a large portion of this, actually, none of it has been spent so far. Of the 2.2 billion, and we are projecting to have savings on SRD by the end of the financial year. Thank you.
Some of the cross-cutting issues that were raised. So, Honourable Bateman, thank you for the suggestions. I mean, we will incorporate some of that in the next report around flagging some concerns that we may have and maybe taking the traffic light approach around all of that. And hopefully that will work. And if it doesn't, we open to any suggestions around all of that. Just on full transparency and accounting and public entities budgets and all of that, I mean, there's a couple of things that I think that are important to consider here. The first is that one of the things that we have to do is first getting it in the same way that we had with the municipal standard chart of accounts, is that we don't have one for public entities and working towards that. A lot of this kind of decentralized systems that public entities then have, one of the mechanisms to deal with that would be through the integrated financial management system. And latched onto that is the digital public infrastructure system with the data exchange that would allow us to see information in a more tangible way. I mean, from a quality point of view, there's a relative level of, I suppose, trust for what we're getting in, knowing that at the end of the financial year, all of this gets audited. And that external audit then gives us the reassurance around the systems that institutions then have around how they report and what they report on. And based on that, we are able to see if there's any discrepancies between what happens during the financial year versus what happens at the end of the financial year. On the RAF projections, I mean, we, for the first time in a long time, I think we've been publishing more credible information around RAF in the estimates of national expenditure. Just more broadly around unauthorized, irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, just because of time constraints, we might have to provide those details for those departments in a written response. Then, Honourable Wakelin, my apologies, we will get you this report, and I'm committing to maybe getting to you with by the 10th of April around TARS. Let me just say something about TARS relative to what it is that we're doing here today. I mean, TARS was a budget reform that was introduced for the 2026-27 budget around what it is you can find in efficiency savings. The mechanisms that budget analysts then uses to identify these programs would be the in-year monitoring system and the continuous analysis that we have to do. So it links back to what it is that we have now. I mean, we started at national because we run the national budget process. One of the things that we always want to do around all of this is to expand it across the entire budgeting system. So it's an incremental thing based on the capacity and the capabilities that we have, not only within the Treasury, but also within the kind of data systems that we have to do this in how entities and specifically municipalities report to us. Just on the issues around project management, contract management, and governance failures. I mean, the Public Finance Management Act is quite clear about accounting officer and accounting authority responsibilities that's set out in Section 38 and Sections 51 of the PFMA. And in that context, one of my favorite quotes in the first publication of the PFMA that was written by Minister Manuel is he says that one of the things the PFMA does is it allows program managers to manage their programs and then holding them accountable for the management decisions. So where those management decisions are taken, the accountability mechanisms within the PFMA are quite clear on who's responsible to deal with all of that. Honorable Kaleka Mazibuko, Just on understanding the accounting risks and the budgeting, I think there's, while we budget in cash, public entities and municipalities report in accrual. One of the things when we were asked to report on public entities was trying to find alignment between the transfers that are made by departments to these entities and what those entities then report as revenue. From a cash point of view, it looks like it's exactly the same. But from an accrual cash point of view, one of the differences around all of that, specifically around capital transfers, is that it may be deferred. So I don't think that there's a problem around all of this, around reviewing the cash versus accrual. It's just about understanding the linkages that we have. Two more points, Chair. The one around monitoring that Honorable Sekede raised is one, again, that's linked to the accounting officer's responsibilities. And then just to your comment about and question about the scope for reform in disaster relief. There's lots of scope for reform in disaster relief. There's massive inefficiencies in the system. There's massive inefficiencies in how funding flows, which we had committed to fixing and through the recommendations that are made in the disaster risk financing strategy. I think it's important about how do we think about disasters, because government has adopted the Sendai framework for disaster relief. And what that says is that the most cost-effective way to deal with disasters is through preparation and planning. That's very decentralized, so that you know what that response looks like before the event happens. In a lot of cases, at least in the cases of public infrastructure, particularly in roads, the best way to respond to disasters is through road asset management. So keeping the culverts clear, making sure that the grass on the side is cut, because when the water comes, it can go somewhere. It's those kinds of things, and it's about how do we strengthen those asset management mechanisms that mainstreams disasters in on that. I mean, Chair, there was with your indulgence, just one issue I think that Honorable Mwali raised around understanding local government and being at the coalface, and linking this to some of the dysfunctionalities that we see within local government. We must be careful that we can't use technical solutions to solve what are political problems. And if there is and governance problems around, we can resolve some of that through things like the ESCOM debt relief program, the municipal financial recovery. The Department of Cooperative Governance has the interventions bill that's currently in Parliament to respond to all of these things. But there are imbalances in the budget around all of this. So just like municipalities owe water boards and then we withhold the money because they haven't paid the water boards, national departments also owe municipalities. We have written to all national departments and with some clear deadlines, and they're coming up in April and May, on resolving the outstanding issues that they have with municipalities on the municipal bills and having to pay that back to us. Thank you very much.
I thank you so much to the team at National Treasury and for the vast and comprehensive coverage of all the questions. It is now, as the clock has struck, we've ran out of time in this particular meeting, so there won't be time for follow-ups. So what we will do is that if there are outstanding questions that either have not been responded to or not, we will send formal communication in that regard. Let me thank the team from National Treasury. These are quarterly reports, and so we'll look forward to seeing you at the next while. You are free to be exempt from the call. To the honorable members, I think it's important to note that the Minister of Finance has written to us requesting that the Special Appropriations Bill be passed, for Parliament to consider it before the 15th of May. Our appropriations bill or our division of revenue bill is being debated on the 21st of April. We are busy finalizing the report towards that. So if there are inputs that members would like to make in that regard, if you can submit them to the Secretariat. And then what we will do is I will communicate to members. We potentially could have a special engagement, even if it's on the 21st or in the next number of days, to consider that report. It's a small report, focuses really, I had a look at the draft on Centec, some of the issues on passenger rail. It looks at some of the issues on Parliament and its rebuilding. So it's really a few. We've already done some public hearings on this issue with COSATU and all the other ones who submitted on DORA. So you will get the draft report sent to you ASAP, and then we will call for an urgent virtual meeting that will then deal with the adoption of that report, pending on the inputs that members will send. I hope that sort of clarifies that particular point. Honourable Bateman.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. There was further information that we had requested underlying the bill, and I don't know that we've actually received any of that information. Are you aware of the status?
I will check and follow up, and then we'll make sure we get that through to you when we need it. Honourable Kwankwa.
Chairperson, sorry, man, Dinel is under defense, Kalo. If they are not playing ball with National Treasury, we need to know that. So that the matter can be escalated accordingly. I mean, the general has been asking for additional funding for Dinel. Now, it would be very, very sad if Dinel were not to play ball when National Treasury requires accountability from.
I have taken note of some of the departments that I believe, looking at these quarterly expenditure, when we finalize the draft program for the next term, there are a few that I'd like to call to get an understanding of those issues. So there are two points to be made on that particular one, Honourable Kwankwa. When we finalize the draft program for the new term, we'll send it through. Honourable Bateman will work on some of the additional information that you need. And then if I can check your inputs going into the report, and then I will reaffirm to members when will be an ideal time for us to reconvene to consider that report so that it can be tabled. It would be ideal if it can be debated on the 21st of April as with the other one. So with those announcements, I'm going to move to close the meeting. It is now 11 o'clock. And hopefully, members, we can, I will keep you posted. In the meantime, please enjoy a happy Easter if we don't speak before then. Mashila, I don't think there are any other announcements. I'm going to call the meeting to be closed.
Thank you, Chair. There's no announcement, Chair.
Thank you very much, honourable members. Enjoy your Easter. We will be in contact. Thank you very much. Good morning.
Enjoy your Easter too, Chair, and members on the platform. Nisithandazele.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you.